Hello, grade 10s. Let's jump right into it here. Yesterday, I posted on your Google Classroom, I posted a video link to a YouTube video discussing the phenomenon of eutrophication that's going on in Lake Winnipeg. So I wanted you to watch that to get an idea of what it looks like in real life, a phenomenon like eutrophication, and the real life impacts that it can have on us. And it's something that hits really close to home, being within our province. So if you haven't watched that yet, just go back. You can pause this, go back to the Google Classroom, and I want you to take a look at that video. I posted a specific time frame inside of there that's the most important if you don't want to watch the entire thing. But make sure that you go check it out because it will give you some insight into what we'll be talking about today. So today, our focus is going to be on that concept of eutrophication. Let me just get my slide ready here, share with you, and we'll go through these PowerPoint slides together. So we'll do eutrophication today, and we'll do bioaccumulation tomorrow or on Friday. So eutrophication, what is it? We finished our last lesson, which we had done last week, and we were discussing cycles. And the three cycles that we discussed were the oxygen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. And at the very, very end of the slides, I had mentioned that there are ways in which we need nitrogen to be able to grow bigger and healthier, more nutrient plants and stuff like that. And I had mentioned that there were a few ways in which humans have added excess nitrogen into the soil using fertilizers. And then we also, it was in your assignment for you to talk about some ways that naturally. Now, when we add this excess nitrogen into the soil for our crops, it has side effects. It has effects and chain reactions that occur because of it, just like everything that we do inside of our ecosystems. And that's kind of the common theme, is that we are a part of our ecosystems, and just like any other animal, we play a role in the dynamics of our ecosystem. So even more so, we play a very large role. A lot of the stuff that we do has a very large impact on the ecosystems around us. So for agriculture or for even aesthetic reasons, like having a nice, pretty, green, lush yard, or for other industry reasons, we tend to add chemicals into ecosystems. And these excess chemicals will play a role naturally in the cycles that happen of the nutrients within that ecosystem, and they're not always good. So let's take a look at one of them, and it's our main topic for today. It's called eutrophication. So what eutrophication is a process in which it at first it sounds like a good thing because it's at first it's an excess of nutrient levels inside of aquatic ecosystems. We have an excess of, say, nitrogen or of phosphorus that make their way into our waterways. And what that does is it leads to an increase in the population of the primary producers. The primary producers, remember, are the ones that create their own energy. It's just a fancy kind of scientific term for plants. So plants are primary producers because they use photosynthesis to create their own energy. Now, when they get an excess of nitrogen, which leads to what we call a bloom or an inflation in their population. And this is a very big problem that we're noticing today in Lake Winnipeg. So again, if you haven't watched that video, just take a second to go and watch it, and then you can join back up with me here, and I'm going to talk about what exactly they're talking about in that video. So at one point in that video, you hear they interview the fishermen, the guys that are making a lot of money off of what's going on, because it's a natural first step. It's something that we've seen before in our studies, and I'll talk about the studies later. But the natural first step that kind of happens in eutrophication is that when fertilizer that's on farmland all around the lake, so it basically there will be like an entrapment of land where all of the water inside of that soil will eventually run off into a certain body of water or into rivers that then make their way into a certain body of water. And the area for Lake Winnipeg is really, really big, and it's mostly farmland. So a lot of that farmland is very, very nitrogen and phosphorus rich. And the fertilizer And that excess nitrogen and phosphorus will run off from that farmland eventually into the water, so into Lake Winnipeg, as they were talking about in that video. What happens is nitrogen's really good for plants. So the plants will have a bloom, and specifically, algae actually blooms like crazy. So we have crazy algae blooms, and what you'll see is like what you saw in the video. It's kind of results in this gross-looking green water that not only looks gross but is also hazardous. It's dangerous. It's got a lot of side effects that it can have for people that are either swimming in it or animals that get into it or the animals that live in it. You'll have an algae bloom. And what happens is because the algae blooms and because the plants bloom, there's a lot more plants, the initial population of the fish will increase. And that's why the farmers were happy, or sorry, not the farmers, the fishermen were happy because they were noticing an increase in the amount of fish that they were catching. That's a natural first step. So that's why I was saying before, it seems initially like it's a good thing. But then what happens is when you get this algae bloom, it ends up covering the top layer of the water. And the plants underneath it will end up dying because they don't get as much natural sunlight, which is what they need. Now, because those plants die, that results in a lot of decomposition that happens on the bottom of the lake. And what happens when you have decomposition is that bacteria, remember we were talking about decomposers in a previous lesson, bacteria and other decomposers actually need to suck up the oxygen in order for the decomposition process to happen. So while all of these plants then end up dying, and the bacteria just naturally starts decomposing them and returning them back to the soil, it ends up using all of the leftover oxygen, or not all of, but a lot of that leftover oxygen inside of the water in order to do this. And what this ends up happening, or what ends up happening, is there's areas of the lake where oxygen levels in that area will drop too low for the fish to be able to survive. And therefore you have fish that are dying as well, and it's really bad for the fish populations. So it's like one of those kind of trademark ideas. Too much of a good thing is never going to be able to last. So for the fishermen, it's looking really good right now. But if things continue the way that they are, it's not going to last, right? Eventually, eutrophication will end up, taking place, and the fish are going to die, and it'll be really detrimental for the lake. So scientists are trying to combat this, and in order to do so, just like we do in our class, in a way, we have to conduct experiments. So there's an area in Canada called the Experimental Lakes Area, and it's about 58 or so. That's the number that I have here. Small lakes and watersheds in northwestern Ontario that have been set aside for scientific research, and it's for us to be able to research what happens when we have excess phosphorus and excess nitrogen inside of a body of water. So these lakes are all located in areas that are very sparsely populated. Therefore, we're not affecting humans by this impact. It gives us just a nice little isolated area to be able to look at, some side effects of this. By manipulating these small lakes, the scientists then are able to examine how all of the aspects of an ecosystem, from the atmosphere to the fish populations, it doesn't all have to be inside of water itself. And then findings from these experiments are often much more accurate than what we would find in small scales, like in laboratories and stuff like that, because there's nothing like being able to see a real life response in nature. So this unique little research kind of method has influenced lots of decisions that the government is going to end up making and industries are going to end up making in order to try to help with this. It's generated, more cost-effective environmental policies and regulations, all to try to help to ensure the safety of our freshwater supplies. That's extremely important. So here's a picture of one of these experimental lake areas. And what you'll see here is that barrier in the middle. When there's the excess phosphorus, you see that really, really thick kind of slimy green color. And then the normal phosphorus levels, it just looks like a nice, normal, healthy lake. So ecologists will take large volumes of different nutrient combinations. So like I said, phosphorus and nitrogen are usually the main two because those are the main ones in inside of fertilizers. And then they found that when excess phosphorus or nitrogen was added to the water, the result was, almost always eutrophication. So it really is, helping us to realize what it is that causes this, and that what's going on in Lake Winnipeg is inevitable and something needs to be done about it. So we're going to end our lesson there, because our next set of slides here is going to move on to biomagnification. And I want to split those up into two different videos. So like I said, if you didn't get a chance to watch that video, please make sure you go do so. It'll give you a nice insight into what it actually looks like, and close to home, inside of a lake that we all know, and I bet a bunch of us have maybe even been to. So take care. I will talk to you later.